The young rancher, coin still clutched in his.
You ever stand in a place so quiet you can hear the sun? That's how it was the day she said those words. You'll regret this. I won't obey. They echoed off the dry boards of the auction stage like a curse that didn't need thunder to sound dangerous. The girl couldn't have been more than 22, maybe 23, skin bronzed by the desert, eyes dark as spilled ink. The men in town had never seen anything like her, and they weren't sure if they were buying trouble or salvation. The crowd murmured, boots shifting in the dust, coins clinking in calloused hands. The sheriff stood off to the side, pretending not to watch, his thumb hooked under his belt. But everyone knew he'd come to see who'd be fool enough to pay for her. That fool turned out to be Calder Maddox, a rancher too young to be bitter, too old to still believe in luck. He'd been quiet the whole morning, hat pulled low, a week's dust on his coat. Nobody knew why he was there. Maddox had money, not much, but enough to buy a horse, a rifle, or a mistake. And that day, he bought all three for $2 flat. When the auctioneer's hammer fell, Maddox didn't smile. He just stepped forward, took her by the arm, and said low, "Come on. You're with me now." That's when she looked up at him for the first time, steady, fierce, like she'd already measured his soul and found it wanting. Her lips barely moved, but the words cut through the dry air clear as a rifle shot. "You'll regret this. I won't obey." And Maddox didn't argue. He just nodded once, like a man who knew he already had. The story didn't start at the auction. It started 2 days before, when Maddox rode into the town of Dry Creek with a wounded horse and half a bottle of whiskey. He wasn't looking for company, and sure as hell not for trouble. But trouble, as they say, don't ask permission. Dry Creek was a hard place, no law, but the kind you make yourself, no water unless you pay for it. The war had left the land dry, and the men mean. Maddox had fought once not for glory, but because someone told him to. And ever since he came back, he'd been running from something no one could see but him. That morning, the town square was full of noise wagons, traders, cattle hands drifting between saloons. And then there was the sign nailed crooked to a post outside the sheriff's office. Auction at noon, property of the state. Maddox had seen enough auctions to know what that meant. But when he heard whispers about a native girl captured near the border, something twisted in his gut. He told himself it was pity. Maybe it was something worse, the kind of curiosity that gets a man killed. He should have kept walking, but he didn't. By the time noon rolled around, the heat had settled like a weight on every man's shoulders. The crowd was restless, merchants, miners, cowhands, all staring at the small wooden stage where the auctioneer stood, hat in hand, pretending this was just another business deal. Then they brought her out. Her wrists were tied, but her back was straight. She wore a rough linen dress too large for her frame, dry dust clinging to the hem. The sheriff's deputy led her up the steps, but she didn't stumble, didn't bow her head. She looked out over the crowd like she was memorizing every face for later. The men laughed nervously, muttered things not worth repeating. Someone whistled. The auctioneer smiled wide, the way men do when they think they hold power over something wild. "All right, gentlemen," he called. "Let's start the bid. Property of the territory, found trespassing on ranch land. She'll make a fine servant, or whatever use you see fit." Maddox felt his stomach turn. The sheriff's eyes flicked toward him, maybe testing him. He didn't move. $2, came a voice from the back. Laughter followed. $2.50, another shouted. The auctioneer grinned, waiting for more. But no one else spoke. The girl's eyes swept the crowd and then stopped on Maddox. Something in that stare made him feel like a man standing too close to a cliff edge. Before he could think, before the voice in his head could stop him, he said, $2 even. The crowd erupted in laughter. The auctioneer blinked. $2? You're under the last bid, son. Maddox's voice came out low and cold. That's all she's worth to this crowd, ain't it? $2 to be free of your conscience. The laughter died. The sheriff shifted his weight, and for a long moment, the desert seemed to hold its breath. The auctioneer cleared his throat. $2 it is, sold. When the stage cleared, Maddox walked to where she stood, the rope still around her wrists. The deputy started to speak, but Maddox cut him off. I'll take her from here. The deputy hesitated. You got papers? Maddox reached into his coat, pulled out a folded slip, the auction docket, stamped and signed. The law was satisfied, even if his conscience wasn't. He turned to her. You got a name? She didn't answer. He tried again. You understand me? That's when she looked up, calm but burning. I understand enough. He untied her hands. The rope fell to the ground like a dead snake. She rubbed her wrists, then said quietly and slow enough for everyone around to hear. You'll regret this. I won't obey. Something about the way she said it made the sheriff spit into the dust and mutter, Boy, you just bought yourself a storm. Maddox didn't argue. He'd been through storms before. They left town before sundown, a single horse pulling a rickety cart. Maddox rode silent, the girl sitting in the back wrapped in an old blanket. The desert stretched around them endless, gold, and merciless. Every few minutes, he'd glance back, half expecting her to run. She didn't. She just watched him, eyes steady, like she was still trying to figure what kind of man he was, savior, captor, or fool. When they reached the ridge overlooking Maddox's ranch, a lonely spread of land dotted with mesquite and broken fences, she spoke again for the first time since they left town. Why did you buy me? He didn't answer right away. The question hung in the hot air between them. Finally, he said, Didn't sit right, seeing you up there like that. She tilted her head. So you bought your conscience peace. He looked at her, then really looked, and saw there was no fear in her, only fire. Lady, he said softly, peace ain't something a man like me ever gets. She held his gaze, then turned away. The silence stretched, but it wasn't empty. It was waiting for what came next. And though Maddox didn't know it yet, the road behind him wasn't the one he needed to fear. It was the road ahead, where $2 had bought more than a woman's freedom. It had bought him a reckoning. By the time they reached Maddox's ranch, the sun was nothing but a bleeding coin sinking behind the hills. The place looked lonelier than he remembered. Fences broken, roof sagging, the well creaking with each whisper of wind. The kind of land that held ghosts better than it did crops. The girl climbed down from the wagon without waiting for him. Her bare feet hit the dust soft, sure. She stood there a moment, staring at the cracked earth, the dying cottonwood by the gate, the house leaning like an old drunk. This it? She asked. Maddox nodded, pulling his hat low. It ain't much, but it's mine. She tilted her head. Looks like something the desert forgot to bury. He smiled faintly. That's the charm of it. She didn't smile back. You live alone? Used to have a partner, he said. Left after the war, took his brother. Guess the quiet's cheaper than company. She walked past him toward the barn. Quiet's dangerous, she said. Makes a man start talking to himself. He watched her disappear into the dim light inside. For a moment, he thought about telling her to stay out. That barn was barely holding together, but something in her walk said she didn't need warning from him. Inside, she ran her hand along the rough wood of the stalls. The horses shifted nervously, nostrils flaring. They smell afraid, she said. Maddox leaned against the doorframe. They smell new people. Don't like change. She glanced back. Neither do you. He didn't answer. Just moved to the corner, grabbed a bucket, and poured feed into the trough. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was the kind that fills the air when two people both know they're thinking about something that doesn't have words yet. Later, in the kitchen, Maddox set a plate in front of her: beans, jerky, a heel of bread. It wasn't much, but she ate like someone who hadn't in days. No sound except the crackle of the oil lamp. You got a name? He asked finally. She looked up. eyes dark in the lamplight. Names have weight, she said. I don't give mine easy. Fine, he said. Then I'll call you whatever suits. She raised a brow. You name all your mistakes? He grinned despite himself. Only the ones that talk back. Her stare softened just barely, then she leaned back in her chair. You shouldn't have bought me. I didn't buy you, he said. Then why'd you pay? He hesitated. The truth was, he didn't know. Maybe guilt, maybe instinct, maybe that split second when her eyes met his and something inside him decided before his brain caught up. I paid, he said finally, because nobody else should have. Her voice went quiet. Then, you paid for a fight you don't understand. The night deepened. Coyotes howled somewhere across the ridge. Maddox tried to sleep, but couldn't shake the memory of the auction, that look in her eyes. The way she said, I won't obey. He got up, poured himself a drink, and stood at the window. Moonlight turned the sand silver. The barn loomed dark, quiet, but something felt off, a shift in the air, the way the wind paused. Then he saw it. A flicker of movement near the gate. Maddox's hand found the rifle on instinct. He blew out the lamp and stepped out onto the porch, boots silent on the wood. The girl was already there, sitting on the steps, knife in hand, staring into the dark. You see it too? He whispered. 3 of them, she said. 1 near the well, 1 by the corral, 1 on the road. How the hell? They move like men who don't want to be seen, she said. That's easy to notice. He lifted the rifle, scanning the horizon. The figures were faint, shifting in and out of moonlight. One of them carried a lantern hooded with his palm. Bounty hunters, Maddox murmured. She didn't blink. No. Worse. Worse. She turned her head toward him. Company men. He frowned. Company? Black Mesa Holdings, she said. They're not here for you. They're here for what I know. He felt a cold drop of realization slide down his spine. You care to tell me what that is? Later, she said. Right now. They're moving closer. He peered again. The men were spreading, one toward the barn, one circling near the house. Get inside, he told her. I'm not hiding. Not asking. I don't obey, she reminded him. He gave her a look. Lady, if they find us standing out here, you won't have to worry about obeying anyone ever again. That did it. She slid back into the doorway, crouched near the window. He took position behind a post, rifle steady. The first man came up slow, boots whispering in dust, lantern low. Maddox waited till he saw the glint of metal on the man's belt. Then he stepped out, voice hard. That's far enough. The man froze. Evenin', he said. Didn't mean to startle. Then you took the wrong road, Maddox said. Ain't much out here but ghosts and bad choices. The man lifted the lantern higher, revealing a face too clean for the frontier. We're looking for a woman. Native, mid-20s. Escaped custody in Dry Creek. Don't know her, Maddox said flatly. The man smiled thin. Funny. Folks in town said you do. Maddox's finger tightened on the trigger. Then folks in town talk too much. Behind him, he heard a faint click, the girl's knife opening. The man's smile didn't fade. We can do this polite, he said. Or we can do it the other way. I already chose polite, Maddox said. You're still breathing. The man's hand drifted toward his holster, slow, cautious, and Maddox fired. The rifle cracked, the echo rolling across the flatland like thunder. The man dropped, lantern flying, flames spilling in the dust. The other 2 shouted, ducked low, returning fire. Bullets whined against the fence post. Inside, Maddox barked. The girl was already moving, pulling him by the sleeve. They ducked through the door as glass shattered. He slammed it shut, dropped the bar across it. They'll burn the house, she said. Not if they want me alive, he growled. Alive for what? He didn't answer. Because truth was, he didn't know anymore who they wanted, him or her. Smoke began to curl under the door, dry grass torched by the fallen lantern. The room filled with heat and the acrid bite of burning oil. Maddox grabbed the girl's wrist. Back door. Go. They ran through the kitchen, out into the yard. The night was chaos, orange fire licking the edge of the porch, horses screaming in the barn. She didn't hesitate. She vaulted the fence, grabbed a loose rein, and swung herself onto the mare he'd given her earlier. Maddox followed, mounting the dun. They rode hard into the open desert, the fire behind them lighting their path like a vengeful dawn. When they were far enough to see the house as nothing but a red smear on the horizon, they stopped. Maddox turned in the saddle, chest heaving, watching years of hard work burn down to ash. You didn't have to shoot, she said quietly. Didn't have much choice. There's always a choice, she said. He looked at her, the firelight flickering in her eyes. You sure about that? She met his gaze steady. No, but you better start acting like you are, if you want to live. He wanted to be angry, but there was something in her tone that wasn't defiance, it was knowing. Where do we go? He asked finally. She pointed toward the dark ridge rising beyond the plain. South, she said, to the canyon. They won't follow there. And if they do, then, she said, nudging her horse forward, we make the desert remember our names. They rode through the desert until the fire behind them was just a faint glow on the horizon, like the earth itself had swallowed the past. The night was cold now, the kind of cold that slides under your coat and settles in your bones. Maddox didn't look back. He couldn't. The girl rode ahead, her silhouette cutting sharp against the starlight, hair whipping loose in the wind. She hadn't spoken since the ranch burned. He hadn't tried. There are silences you don't break. By dawn, the land began to change, the flat plains giving way to broken ridges and rock spines that jutted out like the ribs of some long-dead giant. The air smelled of dust, sage, and something faintly metallic like old blood. You know where you're going? He finally asked. She didn't look back. I was born here, she said. The canyon remembers me, even if men don't. Maddox frowned. And what exactly is it we're riding into? She turned slightly, eyes narrow under the brim of her hat. Somewhere men like them don't follow. Somewhere the law can't reach, and the earth still keeps its secrets. Sounds like a grave. She gave a ghost of a smile. Depends who's buried. By midday, they reached the edge of the canyon, a jagged wound in the earth stretching farther than the eye could see. The wind rose from below, carrying a deep, hollow moan, like the desert was breathing through its teeth. Maddox dismounted, wiped the dust from his brow, and looked down. The canyon floor shimmered under the heat, dotted with cactus and the pale bones of old riverbeds. Looks like a hell of a drop, he said. It is, she said, tying her horse to a rock. That's why no one chases me here. She moved toward a narrow trail that cut down the rock face, thin as a snake's path. Maddox stared. That? You call that a road? I call it survival. Before he could argue, she started down. Barefoot, light-footed, steady as if she'd walked it her whole life. Maddox muttered a curse under his breath and followed, boots grinding against stone. Halfway down, he looked back. The desert stretched endless and empty. Then movement, tiny dots near the horizon, kicking up dust. Riders, he said. She didn't stop. I know. You know, they always follow. The canyon will choose who it keeps. He didn't know if that was faith or madness, but at that moment, he didn't have time to care. The trail twisted tighter, cliffs rising on both sides until the sky was nothing but a slit of white light. Every step echoed. Every pebble that rolled down felt like a drumbeat announcing them. The heat was merciless. Maddox's shirt clung to his back, dust in his mouth like ashes. When they reached the canyon floor, the air shifted cooler now. Shadows deep. The sound of water whispered somewhere close. The girl knelt, pressed her palm against the ground. There, she said, pointing toward a crack between two boulders. Spring runs under. Follow it, and you'll find shade. Maddox crouched beside her. You sure you're not leading me in circles? She met his eyes. You can turn back if you think the desert's kinder. He almost laughed. Lady, I think we both burned that bridge. They followed the faint sound of trickling water until it led them to a narrow opening between rocks barely wide enough for a horse. Inside, a small spring glimmered, water pooling around roots and stone. The girl knelt, cupped her hands, and drank slow, deliberate. This water's older than the war, older than the men chasing us. My people called it the mouth of the earth. Maddox crouched beside her, splashing the coolness on his face. You think it'll keep us safe? She looked up. I think nothing keeps you safe, but it hides you long enough to keep breathing. He nodded, glancing toward the canyon wall. You sure they can't track us here? She stood, eyes fixed on the rim. They can try, but the canyon eats those who don't listen. Before Maddox could ask what she meant, a sound echoed distant at first, then sharper. A metallic clatter. Horseshoes on rock. He rose, instantly, hand on his gun. They found us. No, she said softly. They followed the wrong wind. He frowned. Meaning? She pointed. Up there. A shadow moved across the top of the canyon, then another. 3 riders, dark against the light. They were scouting, searching. She whispered something in a language he didn't know, ancient, rhythmic, carried by the wind. The canyon seemed to hush, as if listening. Maddox's skin prickled. What did you just say? I asked the canyon to be kind, she said. Does it listen? Sometimes. They waited. Minutes passed. Then, faintly, from above, a sound like splitting stone. A rock slide thundered down the far ridge, sending up a cloud of dust and echo that roared through the valley. The riders cursed and scattered. One horse reared, another bolted. The girl watched, face unreadable. That'll buy us an hour. Maddox stared at her. You planned that? No, she said. But my brother did. Your brother. She turned, her expression darkening. He died in this canyon, hunting men from Black Mesa. They killed him for refusing to map the water under this land. So that's what this is about, Maddox said. Not you what you know. She nodded. He hid the spring from them, buried it in stories only I remember. They think if they find me, they find the water. And if they do, she looked at him. Then this desert dies. Maddox rubbed his jaw, thinking, you could have run anywhere. Why come back here? Because the canyon doesn't lie, she said. It keeps its dead close and its secrets closer. They made camp under a ledge near the spring. Maddox gathered driftwood, struck a spark, and let the fire whisper rather than roar. The girl sat across from him, sharpening her knife with slow, deliberate strokes. Name's Maddox, he said finally. I know. And you? She hesitated. Asha. He nodded. Asha means something. In my tongue, she said quietly. It means hope. My brother named me that before the war. Seems a heavy name for times like these. She glanced at him. Hope doesn't need to be light. It just needs to outlast fear. He was about to reply when his horse snorted. Then came the faint crack of a twig. Asha's head snapped up. She mouthed one word. Move. They doused the fire with sand and slid into the shadows. Maddox drew his revolver, Asha her knife. Shapes moved at the canyon's edge too. Maybe 3 men. One held a lantern under his coat, its faint light flickering. They found the trail. Maddox whispered. Asha's eyes glinted. Then we changed the trail. How? Follow me. She darted behind a fallen slab of stone, moving low and silent. Maddox followed, every instinct screaming at him to run the other way. But the strange calm in her movements anchored him. They reached the far side of the spring where the canyon narrowed again. Asha crouched, pulling something from the ground, a coil of dried grass tied with bone. What's that? Maddox hissed. Bait. She lit it with the ember she'd hidden in her sleeve. The dry grass caught quick, crackling like gunfire. She tossed it across the water toward the ledge they'd left right where the smoke could rise through the cracks above. Moments later, a voice shouted from the ridge. There, fire. There below. Gunfire ripped through the canyon walls, echoing like thunder. The men shot at shadows, the ones she'd left burning. Usher turned to Maddox. Now. They climbed through a narrow slit in the rock behind the spring and old flood passage. Water dripped, cold and steady. The air turned cooler, darker. Maddox looked back once, seeing the canyon mouth light up with muzzle flashes. They'll find the tunnel, he whispered. No, Usher said, leading him deeper. Because the canyon doesn't want them to. They kept moving until the sound of gunfire was nothing but memory and the light faded into black. When they finally stopped, Maddox leaned against the wall, breathing hard. You always live like this. She looked back at him, calm and fierce all at once. No, I live because of this. He stared at her, unsure whether she was a curse or a miracle. Maybe both. And somewhere far above them, in the quiet desert night, the riders regrouped, and one of them, a tall man with a scar under his eye, smiled slow. Pike. He spat into the dust and whispered, Run all you want, little bird. I always find the trail. The day burned down to its red bones. Sunlight spilled across the canyon in long, dying strokes, painting the walls with fire. Maddox and Usher moved through the narrow pass like two ghosts clinging to what little shadow the rocks would give them. They hadn't spoken in hours. The silence between them was no longer about mistrust, it was about survival. The canyon had its own heartbeat. You could hear it if you were quiet long enough, the whisper of sand slipping, the scrape of stone, the slow exhale of wind moving through old wounds in the earth. Maddox didn't trust it, but Usher walked like she belonged to it. When they reached the rim of a shallow basin, she stopped and crouched, scanning the horizon. The sun hung low, bleeding into the west. Maddox followed her gaze and froze. 3 riders, far off, silhouettes against the light. Same ones? He asked. She nodded. Pike's men. They move like hunters, not soldiers. He unslung his rifle. How far? Too close, she said. By nightfall, they'll smell the fire if we make one. Maddox looked around the basin, a dried-up creek bed, the ground cracked and white. We can't keep running forever. I'm not running, she said. I'm leading. Leading where? She looked east, where the canyon throat darkened into a maze of black ridges. To the place my brother died. They reached it by twilight, a hollow cut into the canyon wall. Half cave, half tomb. The entrance was marked by a wooden cross driven into the stone, its arms broken. Wind sighed through it like a man's last breath. Usher dismounted and stood there, her hand brushing the splintered wood. He fell here, she whispered, shot in the back by men from Black Mesa. They buried him shallow, like he was nothing. Maddox stepped closer, his voice low. I'm sorry. She didn't answer. She knelt by the cross and began to dig with her hands. The dirt came away dry, brittle. She uncovered a piece of cloth, faded red, tied around a small tin box. Inside was a folded map, hand-drawn, smudged, but clear enough to see the river lines and one marked X deep in the canyon. This is what they want, she said. Maddox took it carefully. A spring? She nodded. The last clean water for 100 miles. Enough to make this land worth killing for. He stared at it a long moment, the paper trembling slightly between his fingers. If we take this to the wrong hands, they'll drain it dry. That's why we can't let them find it, she said. Not Pike, not Black Mesa, not even the law. You plan to hide it again? She looked up at him. No. I plan to make sure nobody ever owns it again. He understood what she meant, and it scared him. They made camp just beyond the cave, under a low outcropping of stone. The air smelled of rain, though the sky hadn't offered a drop in months. Usher sat sharpening her knife, the faint scrape of steel carrying across the silence. Maddox built no fire. "You think Pike's close?" he asked. "Closer than you want to believe," she said. "He's not a man who sleeps easy. He's a man who waits until the dark feels safe, then moves." Maddox stared at the map again, then folded it and slipped it into his coat. "He's not getting this." "Careful," she said. "That paper weighs more than it looks." He met her eyes. "So do you." For the first time, she looked away. Then a sound. Faint, distant. A horse's whinny carried on the wind. Another answered. Usher's head snapped up. "They've split. Two flanking the ridge. One coming down the basin." Maddox grabbed his rifle, checked the chamber. "Then we hold them here. You can't fight 3 men in a canyon." He smiled faintly. "I don't plan to fight them. I plan to even the odds." He pointed to a cluster of boulders above the basin, loose, precarious. "If we can draw them under those rocks." She caught his meaning and nodded. "The canyon fights with us." Darkness came quick, swallowing color, leaving only silver outlines and shadows. Maddox climbed up to the ridge, careful not to dislodge a stone. Usher stayed below, near the trail, where her presence would draw them in. He could hear them now, hoofbeats, slow and measured. Then Pike's voice, low and cruel, cutting through the dark. "Come on out, sweetheart. Ain't no use hiding. We just want to talk." Usher's reply carried calm as a still pond. "Talk with your mouth, not your gun." Pike laughed. "Don't worry. Mine does both." Maddox saw them then, 3 riders moving single file, rifles across their saddles. Pike in front, his pale hat glowing faintly in the moonlight. Maddox steadied his aim, heart hammering slow and mean. He waited until Pike rode under the overhang, then squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked through the canyon, echoing like thunder. The bullet struck the ridge, not the man, shattering the weakest stones. The boulders groaned, shifted, then roared down in an avalanche of dust and fury. The first rider went down screaming, horse crushed beneath him. The second tried to wheel around but caught a rockslide square in the chest. Pike leapt clear, rolling hard, dirt and dust clouding around him. Maddox scrambled down the slope, rifle ready. When the dust cleared, Pike was standing bloody, furious, alive. "You're making this expensive," Pike said, wiping blood from his cheek. Maddox leveled his gun. "Call it interest." They stared across the dark, 2 men cut from the same cloth, both too stubborn to step back. Usher moved behind Pike silently, knife in hand, shadow against shadow. But Pike was quicker than he looked. He turned, firing wild. The shot grazed her arm. She dropped the knife but didn't scream. Maddox fired once clean, deliberate. The bullet caught Pike's gun hand, sent the revolver spinning into the dust. Pike grunted, stumbled, then laughed, a sound too low and broken to be human. "You think this ends with me? You got no idea what you stepped into, rancher. Black Mesa don't send letters, they send men. You kill 1, 10 come after." Maddox walked closer, eyes cold. "Then I'll start counting." Pike spat blood, smiled a slow, ugly smile. "You'll regret this." Maddox lowered the rifle, voice hard. "You're right. But not tonight." He swung the rifle's butt, caught Pike clean across the jaw. The man dropped like a sack of stones. Usher sank to the ground, clutching her arm. Maddox tore a strip from his shirt and wrapped the wound. The cut was shallow, but the pain made her tremble. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded. He said the truth. "They'll send more." "I figured," Maddox said. "That's why we move before dawn." She looked toward the buried cross, her brother's resting place now shadowed under starlight. "No. I move before dawn. You stay." "Like hell I do." She met his gaze, steady, almost gentle. "This fight isn't yours." He shook his head. "It is now. I paid for it. With $2. With something more expensive," he said. "A choice." For the first time, she smiled, not mocking, not distant, but real. Then we ride together. Until when? Until the desert forgets us, she said. They turned toward the east, where the first thin breath of dawn touched the horizon. The wind carried the faint scent of rain. Somewhere behind them, Pike groaned, half buried but alive. His good hand clawed at the dirt, finding the edge of a half-broken badge marked with the emblem of Black Mesa Holdings. He lifted it, blood dripping down his wrist, and whispered, "You'll regret this." The canyon swallowed the sound. Dawn rose slow and blood-colored over the canyon. The world smelled of gunpowder, dust, and something ending. Maddox stood at the ridge, rifle slung low, watching the horizon while Asha packed their few things. The firelight of the night before had burned out, but the air still carried its ghosts. "They'll come," he said quietly. "They already have," she answered. "Now the desert decides who it keeps." They left Pike where he'd fallen. The canyon would finish what they started. Every echo of the man's threat, "You'll regret this," hung in Maddox's mind like a promise he'd gladly keep. As they rode toward the hidden spring marked on her brother's map, the wind shifted. The scent of smoke came from the east, too thick for campfire, too heavy for accident. Asha's eyes narrowed. "Black Mesa's men," she said. "They found another way in." Maddox spurred the dun forward. They reached the rim of a wide ravine. Below, a dozen riders were setting charges along the canyon floor, the company's black wagon parked nearby. Even from up top, the metal glinted with the polished arrogance of money. "They're gonna blow the spring," Maddox muttered. "Dry the land so no one else can drink." Asha slid off her horse, steady and silent. "Then we stopped them." "How?" he asked. She glanced at him, eyes hard. "By reminding them, the earth fights back." They crept down through a narrow wash, using the rock's shadow as cover. The men below worked fast, voices echoing, laughter too loud for the place they were in. Maddox could see the fuse lines snaking toward the spring's heart-thin ropes ready to murder a river. When they were close enough to smell the oil, Asha moved. One swift throw sent her knife slicing across the canyon floor, cutting the lead fuse. Sparks hissed out. Shouts rose. Maddox opened fire, clean and fast, dropping two before the rest could aim. Chaos bloomed like thunder. He saw her running, dark braid flying, fire in her hands. She grabbed the oil cask, rolled it toward the wagon, then lit it. The explosion came like the desert itself roaring awake. The canyon shook. Dust and smoke swallowed everything. When the air cleared, half the riders were gone, buried under the land they tried to break. The spring still flowed, faint and clear, like a heartbeat refusing to stop. Maddox found her kneeling by the water, blood on her arm, face streaked with ash. He crouched beside her. "It's done." She nodded. "No, it's beginning." She looked at the water. "My brother said this place would outlive the greedy." He was right. Maddox helped her up. The wind rose, scattering the last of the smoke. "What now?" he asked. She looked east, where the horizon glowed clean and wide. "Now we ride until the world forgets us. And if it doesn't," she touched the water, smiling faintly, "then at least it remembers we tried." Maddox tipped his hat, eyes on the rising sun. "Fair enough." They mounted up, silhouettes cutting against the light, the canyon behind them whispering with wind and memory. Two souls bound by mistake, by fire, by something that felt a lot like freedom. And somewhere, in that echoing silence, the earth itself seemed to whisper her words once more. "You'll regret this. I won't obey."